The fifth day of the Sharjah International Book Fair saw Indian Parliament member, author, and former Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, engage in an interactive session with the audience and press.
When we won our independence in 1947, in the midst of the carnage and trauma of partition, million people killed, 13 million people losing their homes and crossing the borders, billions of rupees of property damage, the country up in flames. It would have been so easy for the rulers of that time to say that democracy was not going to be suitable, that you needed a firm hand of government to pull the country together, to unite it, and to develop it after this kind of trauma. It took a great vision and statesmanship on the part of Nehru to insist that we would have a democracy, to work hard to maintain that democracy, to build up institutions that had not existed earlier.
You've mentioned in the past that the only way to combat things like terrorism or corruption is to educate people at large. And as a former member of the UN, you said that for an international body to transcend the decisions of sovereign governments when it comes to educational curriculums is not possible. But as a member of the Parliament of India and as a writer, is there anything in your power and influence that you can do to make this knowledge commonplace?
It's an excellent question, Nikita. The message I've been trying to give on issues like corruption in India is to remind people of what Mahatma Gandhi said more than 70 years ago, when he said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." If we want to end corruption, we have to start with ourselves. How many of us can truthfully say that we have refused to give or take a bribe? Okay, maybe we've never had to take a bribe, but have we not, many of us, given one? And if you give one, then why are you any less complicit in corruption? You're giving a bribe because you want a shortcut, or you want to avoid a heavier punishment, or you are trying to get an advantage over somebody else who's competing for the same thing. So then it's wrong of us to say somebody is corrupt, because in every corrupt bargain there is a giver and a taker. The taker could not take unless there was a giver willing to give. So my first argument to all of us in India is refuse to give. If it means waiting a week longer for a license, or waiting a month longer for something, or not getting something even, have the courage to say, I will only do things the right way. I will refuse to cheat the system through bribery. And if we all did that, if we seriously, I wish someone like Anna Hazareji with his huge Gandhian credentials had actually led a moral crusade just to stop giving. If he had done that instead of getting into this Lokpal bill, because I don't believe laws can be written in the streets, and that the institution that he would create in many ways is wrong. But if he had simply embarked on a moral crusade to stop giving bribes, I would have joined him, gladly. I think that's what we should all do, and I hope one day that will be the direction in which India will go. Now, on the question of education specifically, the fact is that just as the UN can't write education curriculums for the country, the national government, the federal government in India, cannot do the same for the states, because in our country, education is a state subject. So each of our states has to influence its curriculum. I would be very strongly in favor of a strong, what used to be called moral science in my days, I don't know what they call it now, a strong moral curriculum as well. I had a teacher in my school, St. Xavier's in Calcutta, a Jesuit priest, who used to call the moral science class values of life. If our society has failed in any way, if corruption and evil are any way proceeding, it's because we have failed to build up these values of life in ourselves. The values that our parents got from their grandparents have somehow been lost in our generation and the ones after. So yes, I do believe strongly that the individual can make a difference, but perhaps a national campaign would be one way to start getting people to think about it.
Manipal TV caught up with Dr. Tharoor for an exclusive interview. Here is an excerpt.
In your book, The Elephant, the Tiger and the Cell Phone, you've talked about multiculturalism. When you talk about something like multiculturalism, another factor that comes into play is multilingualism, and on the basis of which most of our states are divided. So what I'd like to know is, instead of language acting as a binding factor, it is proving to be somewhat of a barrier, disputes over Telangana and stuff like that. If you had all the power in the world to change this, what would you do about it? How would you exactly go about tackling the situation?
See, there are various factors that people focus on. There's history, there's ethnicity, there's a geographical space. Language is only one of these things. So I wouldn't particularly single out language. I do believe, however, that most Indians tend to be instinctively multilingual given the chance, because we're constantly meeting people who speak languages other than the one we grew up with. So I don't see why it should be difficult to have multilingualism if we encourage it both in the schools and, more important, in daily life. Increasingly, India is actually becoming a country dominated by one Indian language, namely Hindi. The popularity of Bollywood cinema has done more to ensure that than any amount of compulsory Hindi classes. I mean, I can tell you, I know lots of people in Kerala who passed out of school having passed in compulsory Hindi and can't speak a sentence. But there are people who haven't studied the Hindi but who watch Bollywood movies who can speak Hindi. So often social forces like cinema, entertainment and so on will itself drive multilingualism. Another thing is the mobility of labor. We're now finding Bihari laborers showing up in Kerala to work and they're picking a Malayalam. Or for that matter, Keralites in Bengal speaking Bengali. So increasingly as Indians move around, we'll all become effortlessly, or with some effort, multilingual.
The advent of television and social networking, online media, things like that, the significance of, I think, books in their physical form is somewhat becoming less popular. Do you think that it is important to reinstate this traditional value of reading books, in their most traditional form?
Well, I do a lot of social media myself. I'm on Twitter. It takes up some time. I do enjoy the internet because it gives me a wide range of sources of information. So I'm not at all negative about that. But there's still no substitute for a book. Now, is that because it's my generation? I got used to growing up with a book and my kids don't feel that way? No, my kids are in their 20s and they read books as avidly as I do, maybe even more so, and they're proud of it. Whereas they're, of course, completely and fully wired and networked as well. To some degree, the bridge is increasingly the e-reader. E-readers like Kindle and so on, but people are reading old-fashioned books, but on a newfangled machine, which enables them to search and skip and find definitions and move places and all of that stuff, while at the same time actually reading a book. But you have to admit that social media, there's nothing more ephemeral than 140 characters by comparison with 140,000 words in a book that may actually leave you with a lasting impression over a period of weeks. So I think even if social media has its attractions, there's simply no alternative to books.